Today is a trip back to Italy and director Dario Argento for a record third time. But hey, when you're on the Mount Rushmore of Italian horror directors, you get some special treatment. I hear you, Fulci fans, and he's on there too. Let me know in the comments what Fulci movie we should talk about. Today we're looking at one of his two hits from 1985. Demons he would only write, but Phenomena, or Creepers as it's known in other regions, he would write, direct, produce, and even have a small acting role in. And for the record, my personal Mount Rushmore of Italian horror is Argento, Fulci, Bava, Mario, although Lamberto is no slouch, and Sergio Martino. The only one I feel that needs both his names to be identified. Umberto Lenzi, Joe D'Amato, and Bruno Mattei will also always have a special place in my DVD shelf and heart. I would also like to point out that the last time I mistakenly referred to today's film as one of his supernatural films, but while it does have a couple of supernatural elements, it's much closer to a straight giallo than any of his Three Mothers trilogy of films. Italian horror in the 80s was a free-for-all of genre ideas. The decade was kicked off with the infamous Cannibal Holocaust, and while that wasn't the first big cannibal movie, it was one of the most important and influential, not to mention banned, entries that would also lead to more with Eaten Alive and Cannibal Ferox to name a couple. The 80s also had quite a few zombie movies that followed in the wake of Fulci's movie with Nightmare City, City of the Living Dead, Hell of the Living Dead, Burial Ground, Zombie Holocaust, and, well, the list just goes on, and we've only cracked it in 1981. Sons and understudies of previous masters like Michele Soavi and Lamberto Bava would also have a few hits between them, and Joe D'Amato and Bruno Mattei would give us some wonderful trash, as well as the signature rip-offs that combine Aliens and the Terminator. Looking at you, Shocking Dark. Throw in some pretty cool self-referential fare like Blade in the Dark, Opera, and The Black Cat, and the 80s showed Italy was just as full as the US in terms of watchable and not watchable horror output. While most of the masters were either dying, already past their prime, or experimenting in multiple genres, Argento was filling out arguably his most diverse decade. He would write Demons, Demons 2, and The Church for his contemporaries, while having the second of his mother's trilogy, Inferno, open the decade, and have two really cool and really different giallos bookend the 80s with Tenebrae and Opera. Smack dab in the middle of the decade would be what some people see as his last great film, a film that I am more than a little embarrassed to say that I haven't seen yet. 1985's Phenomena. Phenomena opens with a scene of the beautiful Swiss countryside and a younger girl who misses a bus. Her name is Vera, and she's about to give us the classic chase and death we are accustomed to getting in these films. She wanders into a house before being stabbed in the hand with scissors and then decapitated shortly thereafter. The only thing missing is the Goblin score accompanying the stalking and kill. This movie is a rare occurrence where a soundtrack is used in place of a score, and at times, it's pretty much my only gripe for the film. The songs are objectively good, but just don't fit in great with a giallo in my opinion. The next scene introduces us to one of our two big non-Italian named actors in the story. Donald Pleasance plays a Scottish forensic entomologist looking into local murders that have happened. He also has a chimpanzee named Inga. It's that kind of movie, and I was ready to swear that the chimp was going to be the killer at the end. Dr. McGregor also lost an assistant to this murderer, so he has a personal stake in the case. We then meet the other famous actor in the movie with Jennifer Connelly playing, conveniently enough, Jennifer Corvino, who is the daughter of a famous actor. She is picked up by Frau Bruckner, who takes her to the school for girls. Bruckner is played by the late, great Daria Nicolodi, who was a partner and collaborator to Dario Argento. Jennifer sleepwalks in her first night and unwittingly witnesses the next murder, which is another really cool and graphic kill. She is more or less saved by Inga, who brings her to the doctor, where they have a nice chat, and he theorizes that Jennifer has some sort of psychic connection to insects, something we got an inkling to with her introduction scene earlier. The Academy runs tests on Jennifer for her sleepwalking, but it stirs up visions of the previous night's killing, and she bails. Another night brings another murder, while we also get to see more of a connection between insects and Jennifer. No, this will not be explained, but yes, it will become more important later. She finds a glove full of maggots and takes it to McGregor the next day, who thinks the killer has unintentionally collected maggots by keeping victim bodies, or parts of them at least, close to him. Jennifer causes an event with a swarm of bugs after being bullied, and Bruckner believes she is to blame for the killings, while also wanting to have Jennifer committed. Jennifer goes back to McGregor, who gives her a fly that he believes can lead her to the killer. The fly does in fact lead her to a house, the same house that Vera found before being killed in the beginning, and she flees after the real estate agent scares her. A detective questions the agent to see about the history and owner of the house. That evening, McGregor is killed in his home while poor Inga desperately tries to warn and save him. It's a tense scene where his elevator that takes him between floors basically leads him to his death. Inspector Geiger is now even more determined to solve the case after his friend McGregor's death and finds out some information at a local mental hospital about staff that had been attacked 15 years prior. Jennifer is ready to leave the country and calls her father's agent for assistance, who arranges for her to stay at Bruckner's place. If you hadn't guessed by now, Bruckner's the murderer, and she is protecting her deformed child from harm who may or may not be a killer also. There's a huge chunk of this movie that makes very little sense. Jennifer avoids being drugged and tries to escape when she finds a chained-up Geiger who's able to assault Bruckner while Jennifer climbs out of the grossest pool this side of Poltergeist. Jennifer finds Bruckner's son, little cutie, and flees like we all would onto a speedboat, pursued by the little bugger before a swarm of bugs shows up and really messes him up before he falls in the lake. The boat's motor explodes faster than a Pinto, and Jennifer dives under the water to escape. She is grabbed by the still-alive Patau, pulling his best Friday the 13th impression before he is engulfed in flames. Jennifer makes it to shore before running into her father's agent, finally. Unfortunately, he runs into a sheet of metal and is decapitated, with the disfigured and crazed Bruckner holding the weapon. Inga is also there, though, to get some sweet monkey justice and save Jennifer once and for all. While I may have griped about the rock soundtrack playing over the kill scenes, they're still mostly well executed, no pun intended. While the death itself of Donald Pleasance's character is tame by giallo standards, the rest of the movie has a Joe Bob drive-in total's worth of gore and effects. You got 2 decapitations, eaten by bugs, razor slashing, and a super cool extendable weapon through the back of the head. The kill scenes play out like classics of the genre and are worth the wait time in between. This leads to the killer being a compelling character too. Daria Nicolodi is always a treat, and she's a wonderful main villain for Dario. There's a good chance she contributed to the script anyway, so she was probably able to imbue what she wanted into the performance as well. My other favorite part of the movie is the crazy last 10 minutes. This movie doesn't make sense all the time, nor does it address every piece of information it presents to the audience, but man is it fun to watch as you scratch your head. Jennifer has escaped to a boat and is chased by a psycho kid before summoning an assist from a swarm of bugs to devour him. Of course, that doesn't completely do it, and a creature that looks like piranhas got to it tries to stop her again before catching fire. Fire that probably wouldn't exist as it is. You'd think that would be it, but there were still a few unresolved storylines. Well, the ones that Dario and co-writer Franco Ferrini felt like covering, and so we get a decapitation for a poor character that has just zero luck, followed by a chimpanzee wielding a straight razor. It's a ton of nonsensical madness, and I am here for it. We have discussed at length the careers of Dario Argento, Franco Ferrini, and Daria Nicolodi. They are absolute stars in their fields, and I recommend anything from their catalogs. For Argento, I'd say check out Opera, Ferrini seek out Red Rings of Fear, and Daria you need to watch Paganini Horror, which also features Donald Pleasance. Argento movies are no stranger to having non-Italian stars either. We had David Hemmings and Max von Sydow in the 2 movies we already covered, and he also used John Saxon, Carl Malden, Jessica Harper, Piper Laurie, and Rutger Hauer in various roles. Donald Pleasance probably secured his place in the Horror Hall of Fame with his role as Dr. Loomis in the Halloween franchise, but he was also a mainstay in my personal favorite Amicus Studios range of films. He would float around appearing in horror projects from countries all over the world, and even more serious roles in films like The Great Escape. Jennifer Connelly stands out a bit in this one, even at such a young age. Her first acting role was in the previous year's Once Upon a Time in America, which could have helped her get into this with the relationship between Dario Argento and Sergio Leone. Her only other horror output would be the American remake of Dark Water, and maybe if you count the remake of The Day the Earth Stood Still or Dark City. She also appeared in the horrifying Requiem for a Dream, probably her most famous role in movie, and House of Sand and Fog. She even won an Oscar for her supporting turn in A Beautiful Mind. This movie is seen by some as Argento's last great film. While I disagree, I could see what the argument is there. It has a shorter cut known as Creepers that was released in other markets, but it's easy to find in its original form. It's streaming on Shudder often and has a beautiful physical release from Synapse Films for those of us with the itch. On top of that, it has a very strange video game legacy with the title Clock Tower originally released for the Famicom in Japan and the PlayStation 1 in Europe. The main character looks exactly like Jennifer Connelly, is named Jennifer, and her friends, who were all adopted by the same man, are trying to run and hide from a killer that has giant shears. Now, if that sounds like a Dario Argento movie, specifically this one, it's because the game's creator intentionally made it that way, being a huge fan of the director and his work and wanting to encapsulate it in video game form. As it stands, Phenomena is still an underseen 80s horror classic that is easy for people that are shy of foreign horror, as it exists completely in English and is easy to find. It has rightfully earned its spot as one of the best foreign horrors. Where does this one rank in Argento's catalog for you? What's your favorite Italian 80s horror flick? Let us know in the comments. Orphanages are creepy. That's just a fact. I mean, they made a whole movie about it for a reason. But this isn't your average orphanage. Oh no. See, they're hiding a crap ton of gold, which also means they're getting bombed by people that want that gold. And that's not even getting into the ghost that haunts this place. That's right, a creepy ghost. Today we're diving into an early film of a future Oscar winner with The Devil's Backbone. Before he was an Academy Award-winning director, Guillermo del Toro was just a young boy with dreams of becoming a filmmaker. After making his debut feature Kronos, he had the chance to head to Hollywood and work on a studio movie with Miramax's Mimic. He's claimed this was the worst time of his life. The Weinstein brothers kept saying they hated just about everything he shot, and he was almost fired. You're fired! Whoa! Luckily for him, Quentin Tarantino came to the rescue, but the damage had already been done. With this experience, he found that he may never want to work in Hollywood again. Instead, he retreated back to Mexico and started to work on a story he'd written back in college. The film The Devil's Backbone would renew his love of cinema, while also giving him another chance to work his way back into the mainstream. The film terrified audiences and quickly made Del Toro a sought-after name in the horror genre. So what exactly is the story of The Devil's Backbone? First, we are introduced to Carlos as he's dropped off at a boys' orphanage during the Spanish Civil War. Nothing like a creepy place in the middle of the desert that holds children, but I digress. In the middle of the courtyard sits an unexploded bomb that had been dropped on the property. It embedded itself in the ground but didn't detonate. They say it's been diffused, but it's too heavy to take away. Now it's more of a decoration than anything else. Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and say that's something that should not be at an orphanage. Carlos starts to be bullied by some of the other boys. One night while sneaking out of his room, he runs into a ghost that the other boys call the One Who Sighs. He begins to try to figure out who this boy is and what happened to him. The ghost, Santi, gives him a warning that many of the boys will end up dying, because ghosts just never have good news, do they? Meanwhile, the teachers and caretakers at the orphanage begin to worry that the war will find its way to their doorstep. Some of the children there are from families that died fighting against General Franco. They hope that the army doesn't find out about the orphanage, or they might come to wipe out the children that were left behind and those that are caring for them. In the middle of all this is Jacinto, an adult who used to be part of the orphanage before coming of age and leaving. He's returned to the orphanage with bad intentions and now hopes to steal a collection of gold bars that have been hidden there. As the tension mounts, we learn that he may have more to do with the disappearance of the child Santi than he let on. The actor Eduardo Noriega said that Del Toro actually gave him a biography of the character. He had suffered a lot as a child at this orphanage. Someone had treated him horribly, and now he's taken out on the boys now that he has grown up and returned to the orphanage. The biography consisted of what his parents did, how he ended up at the orphanage, and what happens to him there. None of this was shown in the film, but it was used to help the actor understand his character and their motivations. When it's discovered what Jacinto's real intentions are, he's forced out of the orphanage. The caretakers round up the children with the intention of leaving before they are discovered by the advancing army, but Jacinto has returned to burn the place to the ground. Children and some of the caretakers die in an explosion. As they pull themselves together with an impending threat descending upon the orphanage, secrets that had long been buried are revealed, and then they have to fight for their lives. One of the great things that Del Toro has done with The Devil's Backbone is to show us a ghost story where you end up feeling sympathy for the ghost. While the situation is scary, we quickly learn that Santi is just as much of a victim as all the other main characters are. He doesn't wish to harm those that share the orphanage with him. His only goal is to get revenge on the person who killed him. With current films like the Conjuring series or other haunting-related stories, we find the spirits to be adversaries. Here, though, the ghost is not looking to harm any innocent residents, only to right the wrong that was done to him. The presence of Santi is visually both scary and beautiful. Santi has a broken skull and blood continuously flows out of it. The look of it, though, evokes a beautiful wonder. Instead of flowing down out of his head, it flows upward, signifying his final resting place and giving it an ethereal quality that you can't look away from. Even for being a movie released in 2001, the visual effects of this film stand out against anything else of the era. Santi not only seems to forever be trapped in his watery grave no matter where he ventures to, his body has also become translucent. You can see his skeleton showing through as he walks down the hallways or reaches out to touch another one of the boys. It's a mastery of visual effects that looks like it could easily have been put together last week. For comparison, The Lord of the Rings Fellowship of the Ring came out the same year and moved CGI effects forward by leaps and bounds. The Devil's Backbone was made for only 5% of the budget of The Fellowship of the Ring. The fact that it still holds up today is amazing. Some of the best scenes in the film include the night that Carlos sees Santi for the first time. While sneaking out of his room with a fellow orphan, he gets left behind and has to hide as Jacinto enters the kitchen. He hears Santi, and when he goes down to the cellar to investigate, he comes face to face with him. He runs to escape the kitchen and return to his room. Carlos thinks he's outrun the specter, only to find Santi appear at the end of a long hallway. As he walks towards Carlos, we are shown the character in full form in the moonlight. It is both beautiful and terrifying to see. When the heads of the orphanage finally confront Jacinto, we see what he really is and get some great back and forth between him, Carmen, and Dr. Cesares, played by frequent Del Toro collaborator Federico Lupi. When Jacinto gets fed up with all the games he's had to play to find the stashed gold bars, Carmen unloads on him with the silver-topped cane that she walks with. Jacinto grabs his mouth as blood trickles down. He thinks he's about to unleash his fury upon her when he finds a gun held on him by the doctor. A great scene to show the character's dedication to their own priorities. Jacinto to the gold, and the others to the safety of the children. Of course, the end of the film sticks out too, as the boys band together to fight off Jacinto. The rest of their guardians have died, and now it's up to them to bring Jacinto to the spirit of Santi as he has requested. When they all reach the cellar, Jacinto thinks he has the upper hand and levels his shotgun to the boys, who are armed only with sharpened sticks. Out of nowhere, one of the boys stabs him under his raised arm in the armpit. Del Toro admitted that this was done on purpose to provide an uncomfortable grimace to the audience. The wound looks very real and very painful. Then Jacinto is beaten down and stabbed a few more times. The result is unsettling and convincing. Bravo to the special effects team that made these injuries look real. Jacinto is finally reunited with Santi as the spirit can finally get the revenge it has been after since he died. While The Devil's Backbone wasn't his first film, it pushed Del Toro to show that he was a filmmaker that could accomplish a lot with very little. He considers it his first film. Cronos didn't turn out as well as he had hoped, Mimic was a disaster, but The Devil's Backbone was able to give him the satisfaction he wanted from a film that he had created. The film ended up with an unfortunate release date. It had its first screening at a film festival in Toronto on September 10th, 2001. Del Toro says that when September 11th happened, he wondered if it was a good time to release such a film that dealt with war and death. In the end, he decided it might not be commercially responsible to release the film, but it would be morally responsible to. It showed that while dealing with war and death was hard, there was life when you reached the other side of it. The boys see everything around them fall apart, but at the end of the film, they travel off to start their lives in this brand new world. Despite the global chaos at the time, the film went on to play festivals across the world. It even won some awards during this run. It would take the grand prize at the Amsterdam Fantastic Film Festival in 2002, and it really cleaned up at the Gouda Film Festival, taking home the International Critics Award, Special Jury Prize, and Youth Jury Grand Prize. Elsewhere, it took home the coveted Popcorn Award at the Latin America MTV Movie Awards, and the lead actor Fernando Tiev even got a Young Artist Award for Best Young Actor in an international film. While the film only received a small release in the US, it got a huge box office return in other markets. Even with its limited run in the US, it still garnered quite a following when it hit video stores. Remember Bravo's 100 Scariest Movie Moments? Well, the scene of Santi creepily haunting the hallway of the orphanage made it to number 61 on that list. Then there's popular horror movie site Bloody Disgusting, which ranked it at number 18 in its top 20 horror films of the decade. They called the film elegant and deeply felt. It's alternatively a gut-wrenching portrait of childhood in the time of war and a skin-crawling evocative nightmare. The love for the film pushed Del Toro to once again try to move forward with his films into more of a mainstream capacity. Mimic had scared him, but he tried again when offered Blade 2. He says that experience was the complete opposite of what he had on Mimic. It was then that he knew he could comfortably move forward into mainstream filmmaking. He could work within a studio system, but also never lose his love for making his own stories. In 2006, he made the film Pan's Labyrinth, which he considers a sister film to The Devil's Backbone. It follows a girl who is also dealing with the Spanish Civil War as she discovers a secret magical world that is beckoning her to join it. Del Toro considers the two films to have a kind of rhyme together. He does play coy about in what ways, as he wants the viewers to discover those things on their own, but says if you can play them back to back, you can see Pan as the next verse in the song that The Devil's Backbone is singing. Del Toro has continued to make imaginative films that capture the audience's imagination and transports them to strange new worlds. His film The Shape of Water won 4 Oscars, including Best Director for Del Toro, and 1 for Best Picture. Del Toro has proven himself one of our best storytellers, and from the looks of it, he has plenty of stories left to tell. While Del Toro has moved on to bigger things in Hollywood, he's always remembered for his horror roots. The Devil's Backbone showcases his impeccable monster and world building, while also setting up his love for the setting dictating the story. Hopefully we will see Del Toro fully return to the genre soon. Something I try to do, and really always did, was challenge myself on watching horror movies that I just knew were designed to mess me up. Some of these were pretty obvious, like watching the first Texas Chainsaw Massacre by myself after I walked to the local video store and rented that and Creepshow. Shout out to Video Unlimited for renting those flicks to a 12-year-old, by the way. Others could be in-your-face rough, like a Serbian film, or horror-adjacent, like Salò. One that I knew very little about was a foreign title called Funny Games, so I added it to my Netflix physical disc queue and waited for it to arrive. It was anything but funny and messed with me like few before or after have. Austria and Germany are very different in terms of their horror output. We've discussed in the past how underrated and prolific German horror has been, ranging from the films of the silent era all the way to modern classics, but Austria has far fewer to look at. Well, to be clear, Austria does follow a similar pattern, but their movies are just less well known. Starting off at the same time as their ever talked about German expressionism films, we have The Lady in the Black Gloves from 1919, Labyrinth of Horror from 1921, and The Grinning Face, also from 1921. The Grinning Face is the most interesting of these, as it was adapted from the story The Man Who Laughs that would also later get adapted again in 1928 with the more famous portrayal by Conrad Veidt. This would also play into pop culture in the following century, with some of the best Joker storylines taking inspiration from that book and its films. 1924 would give us the most famous Austrian horror movie from this time, with another great Conrad Veidt performance in The Hands of Orlok. The film follows a concert pianist who loses his hands in a terrible accident and has his hands replaced with the transplanted hands of a recently executed murderer. That's a lot of hands. He's unable to play the piano anymore, and strange occurrences happen dealing with murder and conspiracy. It was remade a few times as Mad Love from 1935 with Peter Lorre, and then again in 1960 and 1962. Friend of the channel, Eric Red, even has quite a few nods to it in his Best Movie You Never Saw, Body Parts. While there are a few more entries here and there, the industry as a whole would take nearly half a century break. Moving to 1975, we'd get an experimental entry into the anthology horror category with Parapsycho: Spectrum of Fear. It follows specific themes in its 3 chapters and was both lauded and hated for its use of footage from an actual autopsy in the course of its runtime. A little less than a decade later, we'd get one of the most famous Austrian horror entries with Angst. Angst follows the exploits of a serial killer that has been released from prison, only to immediately go on another killing spree. There's no compassion or method for this killer, only to kill and feed off the fear of his victims. It's very distressing and a tough watch, and I would liken it to Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer in tone, if not execution. No pun intended, I promise. Gaspar Noé often cites this film as one of his biggest inspirations for his own career. Aside from a smattering of entries here and there, it would be quiet until award-winning filmmaker Michael Haneke would show us some truly frightening things with his 4th feature, Funny Games. Funny Games opens with the Schober family on the way to a lakefront property while listening to a beautiful classical composition before the audience hears some crushing death metal, something that does a great job subverting expectations of the serene opening. The family consists of the father George, mother Anna, and son Georgie, with a large family dog named Rolf. Shortly after they get settled in, they are greeted by the neighbor Fred, who brings with him a stranger named Paul. George and Georgie get the boat started while a second strange man from next door named Peter asks Anna for supplies. He's super awkward and ends up breaking several eggs, the ones he wanted to borrow, and doesn't leave when the obvious time comes while also being rude in his requests. He's wearing white gloves, something that is way more suspicious than Anna thinks it is, and proceeds to drop the phone in the water-filled sink. Peter goes to leave but is stopped by the family dog and is now joined by Paul. Paul also has white gloves and borrows one of George's golf clubs to try out. George and Georgie hear Rolfie barking before it abruptly stops, and they head back to the house. Paul refers to Peter as Tom, something that adds to Anna's confusion, and the pair won't leave, even when asked nicely. He turns the hostility back on Anna, and George comes to the door, and the strangers won't leave or even allow themselves to be kicked out. They still won't leave and then attack George with one of his own golf clubs. The tonal shift here from tension to terror is wonderful and lets the audience know that nothing is safe. Paul explains that he has killed the dog, but sends Anna on a game to search for the remains anyway. It's here that the movie takes another interesting and decisive turn where Paul turns around and winks at the camera, clearly letting us in on the game whether we want to or not. The kidnapped family avoids getting another set of neighbors caught, and the two sadistic strangers torture the family both emotionally and physically. The two men change names often, with Tom and Jerry being used in addition to Peter and Paul, and even Beavis and Butthead. They bet that the family won't last until 9 in the morning, and then the games become more frightening. The assailants constantly break the fourth wall, and it creates a lack of control for both the audience and the family. They put a sack over the son's head and have Anna begin to undress while George is forced to watch and finally ask her to comply. Georgie escapes after soiling himself and makes it over to the neighbor's house to seek help. Unfortunately, it's the neighbors we saw the two men with earlier, and he only finds a dead body. Georgie is unsuccessful in his attempt to hide and tries to kill Paul with an unloaded shotgun. He and the gun are brought back to the house anyway. The now loaded shotgun is used in a game of essentially eeny meeny miny mo, and Paul goes into the kitchen to make food. We don't see what happens, but a gunshot is heard, and the aftermath is blood all over the TV with poor George's body crumpled on the ground in the corner. The parents are devastated, and Peter and Paul get bored and decide to leave, feeling that the emotions of the situation are used up and the parents won't be any fun anymore. Anna and George attempt to pull themselves together through the grief and pain and decides that George will try to dry the phone here while Anna makes a break for it. It seems like they may have a chance, but the two villains come back with Anna and tie her up and put her on the couch with George. In the middle of explaining to Anna how she and her husband may die and in what order, she's able to grab the gun and blast Peter into the wall. Paul is angry but looking for the remote, and when he finds it, we get another indignity. He rewinds time and undoes her little amount of progress. This results in George getting shot where he lays while they take Anna out on the lake. She's pushed over the side while tied up to drown as the two men casually talk before getting to another house and starting another round. One of the best and most frustrating parts is the way the leader of the two men breaks the fourth wall. Sometimes it's as simple as him winking or looking at the camera. Other times it's with him asking a question directly to us. Finally, it all culminates in the reversal scene. We as the audience have been dragged through all the turmoil along with the family, and of course we're rooting for them to survive. When a mentally, emotionally, and physically exhausted Anna grabs the gun and kills Peter, we think that the tides have finally turned. Even though their son will never come back, they were able to get some modicum of vengeance. Then we are angered more as this is undone by a remote control for a TV. It's all a game, a funny, funny game. The other best bit is just the overall tension and brutality. The tension runs throughout the entire film, even when you just see the two men at the neighbor's home, and really never stops until the movie's over. The brutality is often sudden or even off-screen, which plays perfectly into things sometimes being worse when you can't see them. Finally, the movie goes along pretty normally along the lines of normal thrillers until Georgie is killed. Kids aren't supposed to die in movies, and this one, in front of his parents, is particularly brutal and heartbreaking. The two main villains are played by Frank Gearing and Arno Frisch, and they've mostly stayed with European productions, with Arno also appearing as the titular Benny in Benny's Video from the Funny Games director. Suzanne Lothar, who plays Anna, passed away in 2012, but in addition to appearing in a ton of Austrian television shows, she also appeared in larger international productions like Joe Wright's Anna Karenina and Oscar favorite The Reader. She would also frequently appear with her on-screen husband from Funny Games and show up in a few other efforts from director Michael Haneke. Ulrich Mew was the one actor I actually recognized from this cast. He was brilliant in the Oscar-winning Best Foreign Film The Lives of Others, which also sits in the top 60 of IMDb's top 250, for what that's worth. He would frequently work with Suzanne Lothar and also appear in Haneke's first movie, Benny's Video. Director Haneke is an Oscar-nominated and Palme d'Or winning writer and director who makes, well, let's say challenging films. His first effort, The Seventh Continent, follows a family getting rid of all of their possessions followed by committing suicide together. Benny's Video, as we mentioned before, is about a young boy who films his experiments with violence, including the murder of another child, which he films. He would follow that with today's entry and also have a few more thrillers before remaking his own film in 2007. He would only have 3 other films to date, but 2012's Amour would be considered his masterpiece. Hopefully, the 80-year-old director has something left in the tank to thrill and terrify us just one more time. The movie was derided in its own country as an American slasher ripoff, but it did well in other territories, and its sudden brutality as well as off-screen violence were seen as unique and thrilling. The film continues to be discussed as a 90s gem, and it would eventually be remade in the US starring Naomi Watts, Tim Roth, and Michael Pitt. Unlike most remakes, the film would actually be helmed by the original's director, something we also saw with our entry on Ju-on. That film is nearly shot-for-shot remake, but works in a way that Psycho never could. Funny Games is a hard watch, but a necessary one. It absolutely earns its spot as one of the best foreign horrors. Well, that's all for JoBlo Horror Originals' Best Foreign Horror. Thanks for watching all the episodes and, well, putting up with all my mispronunciations of actors and directors' names. I appreciated all your guys' support.